They're coming to take me away, ha-ha. They're coming to take me away, ho-ho, hee-hee, ha-ha. To the funny farm where life is beautiful all the time. And I'll be happy to see those nice young men in their clean white coats. And they're coming to take me away, ha-ha.
Russell Brand says this is a disorder. We should treat drug addiction like a disease. Do you agree?
No, it's a crime. It involves the possession of a Class A drug, which is a criminal offence, which people do voluntarily and they do it for pleasure. And if we continue to treat it as if it is a disease for which they should be sympathised with, there will be more and more and more of it, as there has been over the past many years. We do not anymore enforce our own laws on this subject. The very word addiction assumes that the person involved has no free will. The whole point of the criminal justice system, and we forget this all the time, is to deter people from committing crimes. Once you've arrested someone, once they've appeared in court, it has already failed. And to soften the court system, to make it into a kind of jolly where the judge wears tracksuit bottoms and is nice to the offender. Oh, you should see some of the things that have been going on in this country, the West London Drug Court, where the judge, as I said, wore tracksuit bottoms and was macy with the defendants. This gives the impression not of the majesty of justice, but of somebody trying to be nice. Now, actually, it doesn't do anybody any favours to try and be nice to drug takers.
There's nothing wrong.
Now, actually, it doesn't do anybody any favours to try and be nice to drug takers.
There's nothing wrong.
The problem
there's a great deal wrong with it, because if you want to stop people becoming drug users, then the best thing to do is to make sure they never start in the first place.
I'm not understanding your point. Your point is to stop drugs and alcoholism by just people never starting?
Well, you two believe in this fantasy of addiction in which people lose...
Fantasy of addiction.
A complete fantasy in which people lose all power over themselves and become victims of this terrible, frightening disease.
But right now you're quoting...
Let me finish. This is what you believe, this terrible, frightening disease after which they cannot stop taking drugs. If you really believe that, then you would presumably think the best thing would be that they never ever came in contact with those drugs. Well, yes, because they've started, because the criminal justice system is so feeble.
Free markets in all drugs would be a disaster. But where countries have decriminalised the possession of drugs, we've seen often very good health gains. And the classic example, of course, is Portugal, where it realised it was economically unfeasible to continue the traditional way of prosecuting drug users.
Let's look at Colorado, for instance. I rang a drug addict friend of mine who's in recovery, and I said, Jamie, what do you think about legalisation? He said, well, if you legalise drugs, send the police around, put me in handcuffs, because in 6 months I'd be dead. They fail to understand actually what addiction means to people. If you're an addict, you can never get enough.
This fantasy of addiction in which people lose...
Fantasy of addiction.
A complete fantasy.
I think so too. The citizens of these United States have already made up their minds on medical marijuana. It's a consistent finding, whether they get a chance to vote for it in a state ballot initiative or whether they're polled on it. Everybody says it's not just cruel and not just unusual, it's insane to be denying to sick people something that is of proven medical efficacy. That ought to be the end of the argument right there. The war on drugs is the last dying smell from the Nixon administration. This isn't a war, it's a misuse of the word. It's an apparatus of control. It's an apparatus of control.
The biggest decriminalisation experiment probably in the Western world has been conducted in this country since 1971 under the Misuse of Drugs Act. Cannabis has been effectively a decriminalised drug in this country for many years. The head of the flying squad, John O'Connor, said so in 1994. Lord Hailsham, that well-known hippie, instructed magistrates to stop sending people to prison for cannabis possession in 1973. The number of people actually arrested and prosecuted for cannabis possession has been dropping like a stone in the past few years. Cannabis possession in this country has been decriminalised. What is now going on is a huge, very well-funded campaign, what I call billionaire big dope, to achieve the next stage, which is legalization, which will allow the marketing, the selling on the internet, the advertising, the appearance in shops of this product, and huge profits to be made.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these. You
will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity. See this important film now, before it is too late.
And Nick Clegg's party has been very rightly concerned about mental health and the way it's neglected. A huge contribution to mental illness in this country is made by the very drugs which he seeks to legalise.
All right, well, let's, taking the point that, in your view, Peter Hitchens, there has been a sort of de facto decriminalisation.
It's not my view. The facts are all available.
But it's the view you've expressed. But hang on,
Mr. Clegg.
Let me get on to...
them. If you read it, you'll have to stop saying everything you say, because everything you say is wrong.
Well, don't say you don't get any gifts. Don't say you don't get any gifts on this programme. But in terms of the mental illness, because that is the big worry for people, that actually you can argue for decriminalisation, and we will cite statistics from countries like Portugal that have actually shown you can then remove the barriers to help addicts. But because of the nature of the skunk or the cannabis that is now being dealt, you are getting increasing numbers of young people suffering from schizophrenia. Why is your party still pushing that policy?
So I think Peter, bless him, just on completely the wrong footing. I don't think that drugs are bad for you, right? Sure. They cause harm. I'm a dad. I don't want my kids hooked on drugs. You have to reduce the harm of drugs. What you can't do, which is Peter and others, is somehow sort of wish it away and somehow think you can sort of prohibit drugs out of existence. They've been in existence for thousands of years. They will always be with us. So as a society, if you want to have a grown-up debate about this, you have to ask yourself why the war on drugs and the prohibitionist approach has not worked, and ask yourself, for instance, if you want to look at the evidence and the data, why is it that we've just had the highest rate of drug-related fatalities in this country, 3,500 people, drug-related deaths in 2014. Portugal, after decriminalisation, and by the way, they didn't do it for some hippie instinct. They did it because originally they were worried about the link between drug addiction and HIV contamination, a spread of HIV. They've had 22 drug-related fatalities. At some point, people like Peter have to accept that the war on drugs is not working. And if something's not working, I generally think you try something else,
Peter,
which is working better.
If you look at the cover of the book, you'll find it says the war we never fought.
Right,
there
but
has
Peter,
been no war on drugs. Nick Clegg is asking for an adult argument.
Yeah, but I want to put the figures to you.
Hang on. Straw men.
Right, but let me put the figures to you in Portugal, because people are interested in evidence-based too. And in Portugal, the number of deaths from street drug overdoses 5 years after decriminalisation fell from 400 to 290. The number of new HIV infections from dirty needles fell from 2,000 to 400. In Washington state, the first year of legalisation, raised a lot of money too that went into helping drug addicts. But marijuana-related convictions fell by 81% after the first year of decriminalisation.
There are mixed figures there.
Well, but everything comes down from decriminalisation and legalisation.
Let me just concentrate on the subject that I know about and that we can influence, which is what's going on in this country, which is the covert de jure, de facto decriminalisation of cannabis in this country. You need to look at the figures on arrests. In the past 5 years alone, the number of arrests for cannabis possession has halved. The head of Bristol Police said earlier on this week that they weren't bothering to arrest people for cannabis. Will you please stop pretending there's some kind of savage prohibitionary war? This country is involved in a huge decriminalisation experiment. All the things which you blame on prohibition are actually the result of this decriminalisation experiment, about which you appear not to know, though the figures are all available. No. Some of them obtained by you in parliamentary questions asked by you, so you ought to know. But if only people would actually discuss this, and I'm constantly told, let's discuss this factually. I wrote an entire book on this. It contains the details of how this happened. Why don't you pay any attention? And why do you say you're worried about your children?
Hang on, Peter, we've run out of time, and we need to let Nick Clegg answer.
You're worried about your children. You should not be pleased with the way in which they're exposed now wholly to a completely unrestrained cannabis trade.
So I think
hang on, Peter, hang on. Let Nick Clegg answer.
So Peter, of course, is correct when he's saying that there is sort of de facto decriminalisation going on. But it's not a very...
I'm going to write that down and quote it.
Well, hang on.
It's not a very remarkable discovery. Everyone knows it. So in Durham,
they never say it, though.
Well, I can get a word in.
You've never said it before. You said
Peter
a couple of years ago.
Hang on a second.
You need to let
you need to let Nick Clegg speak. This is not a monologue. Peter Hitchens,
I have a minority
Nick
view
Clegg
on this
speak.
point. Very rarely gets.
You do yourself no favours with this.
I'm doing myself a big favour.
Nick Clegg.
So all I'm pointing out to Peter is his views are not actually particularly remarkable. Of course, there is de facto decriminalisation going on. The Chief Constable in Durham has made it quite clear that his police officers are not going to arrest people for the personal possession of cannabis. So actually, on that narrow point, I agree with Peter. Let's have a bit of honesty that decriminalisation is happening de facto. That's why in government I always said, let's just do what's right. But what Peter doesn't address is that you have this sort of legal twilight world where it's sort of happening in practice, but it's not recognised in law. At the same time, it's the criminal gangs who nonetheless continue to profit from it all. And my question is, at what point is criminality, mass criminality, the answer to drugs and the harm they do to individuals? I've never understood why anyone thinks that letting criminals run this industry is the best way to protect youngsters, because they have no interest in protecting our youngsters whatsoever.
So let cynical businessmen write as well as they ran the big tobacco, which is almost annuity. It's very, very rare. There are people in prison who possess drugs, but they're in prison for something else. No, let me finish, please. I'm being constantly told that I don't have any facts, and I'm now being told
you're making a point. You're saying there's hardly anybody, and I'm saying there are some people in prison for possession of drugs.
Both statements can be
true.
We know
that the government, for example, did not agree to lower the classification of cannabis,
which is that the authorities have given up trying to prosecute.
For all the arguments for changing things, it seems the obstacles, if you'll forgive me, are as high as ever.